everybody. I wish I could see your faces, but it really helps us kind of streamline the process this way. So I just wanted to introduce kind of our organization first. I know most of you are familiar with us, but I just want to recap because I think sometimes a couple things fall through the cracks. We are Friends of the Rainforest, and we have three main programs. The first of those is eco-tours. So we take a lot of schools and private groups and we arrange for them to go stay in the children's eternal rainforest, and they are able to have access to different guides and different research, and they can work with staff there and with the people that we contract to really kind of gain a better understanding of the environment and the effects that all of these changes that are happening have. We also have the education program, and that happens in the US. We regionally will go into classes in the St. Louis area, but we also have a lot of virtual lessons that are online now, and we appear in classes via Zoom, and we also have a curriculum that's available, so teachers and educators or homeschoolers are able to use that to help teach their kids about tropical ecology, and they're all very hands-on and STEM-oriented. And the last thing we have is our granting program. So MCL is our largest recipient of our grants. Sometimes those are education-based, sometimes those are from the protection, sometimes those are land purchase, and so we'll be talking more about that today. But just so everybody has an idea of kind of the three things that we focus on as an organization. So I am Chelsea, I am the executive director. I know I email with some of you sometimes, but I don't get a lot of face-to-face with people. So I have been with Friends of the Rainforest since 2014. And I am really excited to be working for this organization and be working with Lindsay, who I feel like in the past couple of years, we've really done a lot to kind of develop our relationship and work towards kind of a more unified front and really have some good communication. So I want to introduce Lindsay. Lindsay is the executive director of MCL, and she has been in MCL for 5 years now, but she actually has been in Costa Rica for 12 years permanently. And she first came in 1997 for her undergrad work. So I'm gonna let her talk a little bit about her organization and herself, and then we will move on to some of our questions and we will go from there. So Lindsay, I will turn it over to you.
All right, sounds good. It's nice to, I guess I can't see anybody except for Chelsea, but it's nice to be with you guys today and have this opportunity to talk a little bit about the Monteverde Conservation League and the Children's Eternal Rainforest. So like Chelsea said, I have been with the league for 5 years as the executive director. I am originally from Southern California, from San Diego. I think it's one of the few parts of California that is not on fire right now. And I have been in Costa Rica permanently for about 12 years now. My background is in biology and tropical ecology, but I've spent a lot more time recently as an administrator than doing any actual science. And so the Monteverde Conservation League is the Costa Rican nonprofit organization that is the steward of the Children's Eternal Rainforest, Costa Rica's largest private reserve with about 56,000 acres in conservation. And we are focused on the protection of the forest in all different ways. So there's direct forest protection in the way of forest patrols. There's also environmental education. There's all of the administration that goes into it. There is maintenance. And then there's also, at some point, there will again be visitation to our field stations and trails and all of that, everything that entails. So it's a really neat organization, and I'm really happy to be able to share a little bit more about it with you guys today.
All right, thank you. All right, so we're gonna dive right in and start going over some of our questions. If you have any follow-up questions that you want answered, go ahead and put those in the chat, and we will be trying to get to all of those questions today. If we are not able to, we will go ahead and see if Lindsay can answer some of those at another time, and we will attach that to the email that we send out with the recording. So if you have other questions, just push them out in the chat and we will figure out what we can get to today. All right. So Lindsay, the first thing that people want to know is how has the scope of work changed this year, and what effects has the pandemic had on MCL?
Okay, yeah, that's a great question. And so I think there's a couple different components. The most obvious and urgent change or effect that the pandemic has had on us is that it has completely stopped tourist visitation to Costa Rica. Costa Rica closed its borders to international tourism in mid-March and is only just beginning to open borders again to select countries, and then starting in September to select parts of the United States. And so we have taken a direct hit economically through loss of visitation at our field stations and trails. And I think one way in which the Children's Eternal Rainforest is different from quote unquote normal tourism is that we receive a lot of student groups, academic groups, educational groups, not typical tourism. And so when we look at the return of visitation, it's also not enough for us to say, oh, the border's open, tourists can come, because the base of our income is really student study abroad groups. And that's something that clearly is going to take a good while to become reestablished. And it's likely that it will look really different when it does get reestablished. And so related to the financials, that's a big part of our income, and the revenue that we make at our field station, San Gerardo and Poco Sol, as well as our trails at Bajo del Tigre and Finca Seder, typically supports the protection and conservation of the whole rest of the reserve. So money generated in a really small part of the reserve by visitors is typically supports the conservation of the whole thing, or a lot of it. I guess related to that, our field stations are closed right now. Poco Sol and San Gerardo are both closed right now because it's not economically sustainable to operate them in the absence of meaningful quantities of visitors. Bajo del Tigre in Monteverde is open. It opened up on August 1st. And so we've been receiving mostly neighbors and Costa Rican tourists. I think so related to the loss of income, we have had our entire staff on 50% time or less since April 1st. And last month, we also had to cut about 20% of our staff, period. So right now, we have approximately 80% of the people, and those 80% of the people are working half-time. So we have a really reduced ability to do the work that needs to be done in terms of forest protection, in terms of maintenance, in terms of maintaining presence at our field stations. Even if there's no guests, we can't just abandon them, although some poachers would really probably like that. So it's been a challenge to get all of the work done with reduced financial resources and reduced staff. And then ironically, although we have less people and less time to patrol the forest, unemployment in the communities surrounding the reserve has actually led to increased problems in the protected area, whether it's because people are poaching or people are tired of being quarantined in their house and they want to go out and hike, and they go hike in a restricted area of the reserve. And so we've been seeing more illicit activity. And I want to mention really quick, because I think it's important to clarify that at least to date, in our region of Costa Rica, the reason why people are hunting is not due to economic necessity or hunger. It's literally the same people that always are out there being a problem. They just now have more time to do it with. So all of those things have been different and more challenging this year since the COVID pandemic got started.
All right.
Yeah.
So with all that in mind, with thinking about the visitation loss and the funding loss, I did mean to mention too, which now is a good time. So you have applied as MCL, you've applied for 2 different grants, and we've sent those down, and they're approximately 20,000 with both of those grants put together. So specifically for those grants, we've raised about 2,900 just to make up from what we've already sent down. And so those efforts are ongoing. So if any donors want to support MCL directly through those grants, you're welcome to do that. And you can just cite these current grants. And what those grants are paying for are the staff, the guard salaries for the second and third quarters of this year, where MCL is not seeing income. And really, it's not anticipated that you guys are going to see income for quite some time from this. The US is a big source of those student groups. And what we're seeing, especially with some of the colleges in the Northeast have reopened, but they're not all reopened. They're not all reopened to everybody. And depending
study abroad is not on the forefront of colleges' minds right now, I feel like.
A lot of it's still
they're just trying to figure out how to be a university on campus.
Right. And I know a lot of the campuses are actually reopening in some degree, but the classrooms aren't. And so it's still a very complicated thing. And when we're looking at scheduling trips, those are always scheduled minimum 6 months out. So we're already where we would start seeing the spring and the summer trips for 2021, and those aren't there. So, you know,
we're not anticipating any visitation for the rest of 2020. And to be completely honest, I worked in study abroad for a long time too, so I feel like I have somewhat of a handle on that. I wouldn't expect any meaningful amount of student groups before summer 2021. Summer semester, academically speaking.
Yeah, I think we'll be looking at late 2021 or 2022 before it's even a possibility. So this is a big, it's a big deal. And I think what people need to remember is that the forest still, especially now, needs to be protected because you have people who are upping their poaching. So it becomes an increased issue. So all of these things in mind. So what are MCL's needs going forward from here?
So our immediate need is funding. And so just to quickly explain, in addition to money from visitation to field stations and trails, we get some of our money from the Costa Rican government's Payment for Environmental Services program, or PES. That funding has not been affected for 2020. However, that program, the Payment for Environmental Services program, is funded by a petroleum tax within Costa Rica, which is very much tied to lots of tourists coming to Costa Rica and people driving a lot. And also related to the pandemic, the main thing the Costa Rican government has done is prevent people from driving to prevent them from going anywhere and spreading coronavirus. So they are already estimating that the program will be affected for 2021 as well. So we need to get a handle on our funding situation. We need to maintain our costs as low as we can. Our main cost is staff salaries, to be totally honest. We have cut costs in every other way possible, and that's what we're left with. And so we will continue fundraising, and we will continue looking at other alternatives to make sure that we have some kind of income. And then when the borders do reopen, or as they reopen, then visitation will be important. It will be an important part of re-establishing our income related to field stations and trails. But again, things look different because people are traveling differently. And especially, for example, in Bajo del Tigre, we used to offer a lot of guided tours where a bunch of people would be in one tour. So now we're looking at how to revamp those tours and offer them as a tour within your social bubble, right? So that we're not promoting the spread of COVID within our guided tours. Right. But I think, keeping up fundraising and looking at ways to stabilize funding, as well as looking at increasing visitation as that becomes a possibility.
And I think it's important too, I know that you and I have talked about this, you have a great staff right now. So when you have a really good staff like that, being able to keep them on, even in a reduced capacity, one, it's really about loyalty as a company and loyalty, or as an organization, and loyalty maybe that's not the right word, but you know, you're doing the right thing. You don't want more unemployed people in Monteverde. And a big thing from the organization standpoint is that if you reduce your staff, eventually the goal is that you have to add that staff back on, and you might not have the same people. You might not have a team that's as effective, and you also then have the cost of training, and it becomes a whole other process. So it's not always the most effective to say, okay, we're going to reduce these staff members, we're going to take them out and then go forward from there.
Exactly. I mean, I think that from the beginning of this has been a really important piece of the puzzle, is that people are part of conservation. And so we do have an amazing and committed staff, and also, you know, people who are hungry and are worried about putting food on the table are not worried about conservation. And so we did hold out for 4 months before we made any layoffs, which was approximately 4 months longer than most other organizations or businesses locally did so. I mean, a lot of people just cut their staff or suspended contracts right off the bat. And the reason that we finally ended up making cuts is because we started to project just how long the effects of COVID are going to last in our particular case. And our staff, as it does come back to full time, is going to be smaller. Like, this crisis is causing us to shrink as an organization, and there simply were positions that even if next month we had a whole bunch of visitors, we wouldn't reestablish those positions. And
so we did
that, to me, was really unfortunate and a really hard decision, but it's the reality.
Right. So we did have a viewer question: how many people are employed by MCL? And I guess how many are employed currently, and then how many have you had to let go since this started?
Okay, so we were 28 in March, and we are now 22 staff. And so that staff includes 4 forest rangers, it includes, now current numbers, it includes 4 maintenance staff, it includes people that are at each of the field stations and trails, and it includes our administrative staff as well as our environmental educator. And all 22 of us who are still on board are at 50% time and 50% pay. Or some of us are at 50% pay and 150% time. COVID, in addition to causing all of the things that we have talked about, it has caused a whole host of just bureaucratic hurdles that one must jump through as an employer and as a business that receives tourism visitation. It's crazy.
Right.
So.
Right. Okay, so we're going to move on to some of the questions that viewers have sent in before. So the first one is from actually one of our board members, and I think this is a good question with talking about people being conservation. So Costa Rica has seen one of the biggest, if not the biggest, turnarounds as far as forested land and then reforestation in the past 30 years, I want to say. So have you seen a change in the community's attitudes towards the rainforest from being a direct resource to having value as a tourist draw, and to now maybe having intrinsic value on its own?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really neat question. It's a really complex question. So we have definitely seen a change in community attitudes, and I think that is in part due to our almost 35-year history of environmental education programs in the communities that surround the Children's Eternal Rainforest. And so we have now actually people who are guides and who are adults and who are residents in the communities that surround the Children's Eternal Rainforest who took part in environmental ed as kids in school. And so I think we definitely see that, that effect. And actually last year we had our environmental education program for girls, our Girls Environmental Club, and it was called CAN, Club Ambiental de Niñas, and it met every Saturday And the first Saturday, our environmental educator, Maria Fernanda, invited all of the moms to come so that they could meet her and they could sign permission slips and see what the deal would be like, so that their daughters could come back weekend after weekend. Met about once a month. And the moms almost all wanted to continue coming. And so I think that to us was really cool, not because they didn't want to leave their daughters alone, but because they were really interested and really motivated. And they said, oh, I have another daughter, can I bring her too? And so also seeing that adult interest in participating and in the importance of environmental ed was really meaningful for us. Last year in 2019, we also saw from our small native tree greenhouse, we saw the greatest demand that we've seen in recent years for seedlings from our neighbors who are interested in reforesting areas surrounding springs and water resources. And people specifically gave that reason when we asked, like, what are these trees for? They would say, we're going to plant them near our watershed. We're going to plant them near our water source on our property. And so people also beginning to understand that reforestation and forest is important for trees, I think was really meaningful. And then I guess I would also mention, since we were talking about payment for environmental services earlier, that's a program that's open to anyone in Costa Rica who is a landowner with forest on their property. And we have played a role over the past 10 years or so, probably less, I guess, maybe 6 years or so, as helping our neighbors also be able to place their properties in the environmental service payment program with the government. And so that's a way that we've been able to directly help our neighbors protect the forest on their properties and receive an economic incentive for doing so. And people are now also starting to realize that not only is it an environmental benefit to have their forest, but they can get a little bit of cash out of the deal too. So.
Right. So it seems like there's a shift from kind of commodifying the forest into protecting, starting to understand here's what the forest is doing for us, and we need to protect those things, and especially the watershed where you have, you have hydroelectric power, you have
had one or two big sponsors, right, who kind of bankrolled the whole project. Since the beginning in the 1980s, it's always been a grassroots movement that's been made possible by many, many, many people, each making contributions to the extent that is possible for them. And that's what we've seen now too. And so, having many supporters, each of whom is giving, whether it's $5 or giving their time or making a larger financial contribution if they're possible, or just sending us messages and saying, hey, we're having a hard time too, hang in there. All of that has been really helpful.
Right. All right, so one of the big questions that we always hear, are there still pieces of land that would be acquired if they became available to fill in habitat gaps or make the Children's Eternal Rainforest easier for the guards to protect?
And so the answer to that question is always yes. We don't have, obviously, operating money that is available for land purchase, but when there are specific funds available for land purchase, we have target properties that help us increase connectivity between our reserve and other protected areas, particularly in the area of the Bellbird Biological Corridor on the Pacific Slope. And or help us fill in holes within our reserve, or block strategic accesses to poachers or what have you. And so yes, and the way that we've been doing land purchase and protection is for every dollar that is donated for land purchase and protection, we will use 50% of that for the land purchase, 40% for protection, and 10% for our endowment fund, which is a way to ensure that there will always be money to protect that piece of forest, not just that we buy it and then, in 10 years can't figure out where the money's going to come from to take care of it.
Right.
And so right now we actually have a property that's close to Monteverde that's under contract for purchase, and we have been in a process of payments for that property. We're about 80% to the total. And so we are looking for the remaining funds to finalize the purchase of that property.
So, and what's important, I think, for our donors to know is that honoring that 50-40-10 split, whenever we receive a donation that is specified for land purchase, because that happens pretty frequently, it is immediately earmarked into this category. So the way that the US government works is that we can't approve the allocation of funds until we have a grant. So when people are hearing that MCL has a property, the process then would be Lindsay provides us with a grant request and it gets approved by our board. And then we take the funds that people have donated specifically for that purpose, and then we use those funds to pay out. And I think a lot of times that's hard for people to understand, but really it helps, because when we collect those funds over a period of sometimes 2 to 5 years, what we're seeing is you can't give $500 and expect an acre of land to be bought, because that's not how land is sold. But when we collect, and I think we're over $40,000 right now that's available for land purchase grants, we can take that chunk and buy a big property that you guys have had your eyes on. And I think that's really important for donors to kind of understand that you may not see an immediate turnaround of an acre being purchased from your donation, but what you will see is important protected areas then becoming part of the Children's Eternal Rainforest.
Yeah, I think that's a really good explanation that Chelsea makes, because sometimes we do have people say, you know, what are you going to buy? I'm going to give you $1,000 for land purchase. What can you buy? And I'll say, well, with $1,000, nothing, but we can add it to the fund that we have earmarked for land purchase. And with that money, we can eventually purchase one of the priority properties that meets our checklist of, you know, what should a property be like for us to purchase it.
And in no way does that diminish smaller donations for land purchase. And if anything, we need more of those. We want to know where you want your money to go, whether it's education or land purchase or guard salaries or whatever that the case may be. Because if we know, then we know what we're supporting and we know what we have available for MCL at that point. So it really does help. And even if it's $25, like Lindsay was saying, every small donation goes into that fund and really makes a big difference when we're ready to make that purchase. Okay, so we have gone through all of our pre-written questions. So if anybody has any other questions, have you seen any typed in so far? Okay, so I haven't seen anything typed into chat, and we're almost out of time. But if, Lindsay, if you have anything that you think of adding, just jump in.
Okay, no, I mean, I think it's really great to have this opportunity to talk with people in this kind of official format. But I guess what I would say in closing is if people do have more questions, or if they think of more questions after this session is finished, to send them to Chelsea and Sophie, or to get in touch directly with me. And I would be happy to answer those questions. One of the things I guess I would add is that we, before COVID, we were going to add a staff position that was focused on communications and outreach, with the purpose of, you know, improving communication and keeping up our bulletin and keeping up our social media and all of those kinds of things. And we weren't able to do that for obvious reasons, but following us on social media is also a pretty good way to stay in touch with us if people are interested. And just thank you, everyone, so much for your interest and for your time and for your support. It's really, I mean, I think I mean that when I say, to me, one of the most impressive things about this forest is that it exists thanks to thousands and thousands of people around the world. So thank you.
All right. So we did get a question that was typed in, but actually I'm going to save it for email format only because it's about budget and numbers. And I know sometimes you have to look those up. So I know when people
has now been relegated to my cell phone,
right,
where I'm not near my computer. So to get away from the second grade Spanish class.
So if anybody does have questions, you can email them to me or Sophie, or just info@friendsoftherainforest.org. And if you want to visit the Children's Eternal Rainforest website, it is children'seternalrainforest.org, and that redirects you now to their main site, which was different. So if you still have the main site bookmarked on your browser, it'll take you to the same place. I want to say thank you for everybody who came. We really appreciate this. And we didn't get everything recorded with us getting kicked off, but we will make the recording available. And we are planning on this being the first of a lot of different events, virtual events that we are going to host. So if there's anything that you guys want to see or are interested in, we have a lot of different ideas, and they're not all these one-on-one talks. Some of them will be guided tours or different events that we can do. So let us know. We are open to feedback. We want it. We want to know what you guys want to see. And yeah, so you can send us an email. You can join us however you see fit, social media or otherwise. And again, if you have any questions, go ahead and send them our way, and we will get with Lindsay and get back to you guys in probably about a week so that everybody has time to send those in, and then we can give Lindsay enough time to answer those questions. All right. So Lindsay, thank you for joining us, and have a good day.
Thanks. You too. Bye, everyone. Thanks again.
Bye.